You're listening to the Prismarine podcast, a podcast created by youths who are intrigued by the complexities of the maritime industry. This podcast is dedicated to the sharing of knowledge from different stakeholders in maritime. Each episode, we sit down with maritime professionals from various sectors in maritime as they share their valuable experiences and journey throughout their maritime careers. We also discuss current trends and future insights to the industry. We believe in the power of conversations to gain clarity, new perspectives, and a better understanding towards this dynamic industry. So welcome to another episode of the Prismarine podcast, a podcast created by youths for youths. So just a little reminder, the full audio podcast will be available on Spotify and Podbean, and the links are in the description below. And so for this episode, we'll be having two segments, and so be sure to catch the next episode where we will be having a discussion on maritime issues within the maritime sector, as well as having a round of Q&A session with our guest speaker. So I'm really excited to introduce the guest that we have today. He's none other than Chris Jones. Thank you for being on the show.
It's a great pleasure. I'm very, very thrilled to be with you. Thank you very much indeed.
So just a little bit about Chris himself. He has over 45 years of experience in the shipping sector. And as a young man, he has spent his early years as a shipbroker at Clarksons. And he has went on to serve at other companies as well, including SSY and Welham Shipping. And he took on various other roles such as public relations and sales when he went over to the Baltic Exchange in the later part of his career. And he even managed to set up his own company, which I would think is a key milestone in your career itself. He's currently a consultant at HFW under the shipping sector, to which he will share more about later. And so thank you, Chris. Maybe you can share a little bit more about what you do and how did you end up in the shipping sector itself?
Well, I come from Wales, actually, and to quote the words of the immortal Dylan Thomas, let's begin at the very beginning, which is a line from Under Milkwood, actually, a very famous poem by him. But I was born and brought up in Wales. I was a product of a teaching background. Actually, both my parents were teachers. But we had this connection with the Far East, actually, with Malaya, as it then was. My mother was brought up in this part of the world, and also grandfather was a British colonial civil servant then. But at any rate, I went through school. I was not a particularly academic student by any stretch of the imagination, and I was going to follow my parents into teaching. When I was in the lower sixth form, my uncle, who was based here in Singapore, and this is the shipping connection actually, he was a ship agent, and he came home. He was a terribly colonial sort of fellow. He said, "Christopher, what are you going to do with yourself when you leave school and go on to university?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be a teacher like Mum says." "Don't be a fool, dear boy. You must look at shipping, and particularly shipbroking." So he gave me a.
How old were you when you
I was in the lower sixth, so I was 17, going on 18. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But to cut a long story short, he advised me to write to several companies in London. One was H. Clarkson and Company, and the other two are shipbrokers, which are now actually non-existent anymore. So I wrote away, and the only company that gave me an interview was Clarkson's, and I was rather nervous about. I mean, London was a sort of a place that was very far away from me in those days. I was a little bit cowed about going up to London and being interviewed by these chaps in Clarksons, the directors of Clarksons. And my father gave me the best advice at that stage that I will never forget for the rest of my life. He said, "Son, don't be cowed by the man who's sitting opposite you, even though he might look or feel important. Just remember, he sits on the toilet like you." Now that, when you think about it, is very, very good advice indeed, actually. So up I went to London, and to cut a long story short, they said to me that I would be taken on as a trainee, provided that I passed my A-levels. Now in those days, A-levels counted for a lot, believe me. And fortunately, I passed my A-levels, and I was taken on the next catchment, which was actually going to be in the January. Our A-level results came out in the August, and so I worked on a building site to earn some cash
while waiting for the results to come up.
No, I got the results, I passed, but I had to earn some money because I came from a family of 5, so I knew full well that my parents wouldn't be able to support me, and plus the fact that Clarkson's paid a pittance actually as a trainee, so I had to amass some money. In those days it was tax-free, so I was able to put together quite a lot of money in for 4 months. And up I went to London. In those days Clarkson's a very structured company. They had a strict training program. They put me in the general office first of all, delivering letters around the City of London. This was a kind of a character training.
As a trainee?
As a trainee, yes. I mean, this is part of your character training actually, because they wanted you to sort of start at the bottom, so to speak. And I was in the general office with
letter delivering.
Well, I think it just makes you get to know the City of London, get to know the people in the office as well. I mean, I had to sort of get lunches for people and things like that, you know. But I took great solace from the fact that one of the guys who was in the general office with me was a chap called Lord Mount-Even, who became the Lord Mayor of the City of London actually only 3 years ago. So it was just character training. Thereafter you went on to other menial tasks, but eventually you went into the departments of Clarkson's. One of the A-levels that I passed was French, but in those days it was very much sort of literature rather than sort of spoken French. But somehow I managed to BS my way into getting sent to France actually as a young trainee. First of all to Dieppe to learn how to build small ships, and then to Paris, where Clarkson's had a broking office.
Oh, well, that's very far from London, and even from Wales. You just
it was a very exciting time.
How old were you then?
I was there for about a year in total, 3 months in Dieppe and 9 months in Paris actually.
So you were in your early 20s?
Yes.
Travelling around?
Well, it was wonderful, it really was. And you know, I just took to it like a duck to water, and my French improved in leaps and bounds. And it was a great, but also Clarkson's had this strategy of wanting you to grow up, you know, and learn a little bit about life, etc. It was a very well structured traineeship, I must go. Then I came back, I went to the various departments. The most exciting probably was in the dry cargo department when I was on the Baltic Exchange. And in those days, the Baltic Exchange was a function exchange. So I'd go onto the floor at 11:30. The floor would open up, and the owners and the owners' brokers, etc., would sort of congregate on the floor. And you'd be looking for cargoes and ships to marry up basically with the owners that supported you, etc., etc. That's right.
What does it mean by function exchange? It just mean that it's physical, like you have to go down and like, hey, okay, here's the book.
And it was it. So make friends with you know the Greek owners' representatives, or some of the Greek owners indeed, etc. So I got to know a lot of people. I mean, there were probably about 1,000 people on the floor in those days.
Well,
it was really a very vibrant exchange. And then I went to other departments, but the department that really wanted me was the sale and purchase department, which is the buying and selling of ships and the new construction. So I started there, and the Clarksons in those days was a massive company, and really business came through the door. So as a young guy, suddenly I was selling ships, you know, and making money, and
the commission is
well, I mean, they started you off slowly, but eventually, you know, my reputation became reasonably good, and I was earning a fairly good salary. So much so that myself and another guy were sort of approached by SSY actually to come and.
How long were you at Clarksons?
I was there until 1986. So about 5 years, yeah.
5 years.
And SSY approached me, and for a few dollars more, I'd got married in the interim, and we had one kid, yeah. Sorry, this is not 76, not 86. I beg your pardon. Sorry. So I joined SSY, and then I realised how big a company Clarkson was. Business used to come through at SSY. We had to sort of strive very hard to get the business, but we did okay actually.
You were still in France during this time?
No, I was based in London.
Oh, so you moved back to London?
I'd moved back, yeah, because Clarksons brought me back to London. And SSY was up in those days was in the Baltic Exchange, the old Baltic Exchange, before it was blown up by the IRA actually. So the dome of the Baltic Exchange used to sort of go through our office. It was quite a beautiful office actually, old style. Anyway, '82, I was offered a job out here, and
in Singapore.
In Singapore, and obviously, in view of the fact that the background I had with the relationship with Malay as it was, and the fact I was intrigued about doing business out here, I thought I'd come out and give it a go. And my kids were quite young at that time. You know, there was no disruption in schooling, etc. So,
what drawn you here? Why were you thinking about the Far East? You know, wasn't it very comfortable there? Didn't you think that, oh, the weather here is going to be an issue?
No, I travelled to the Far East before on business trips, actually, but I've never been to Singapore. Singapore in those days was probably somewhat of a backwater when it came to shipbroking.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it was obviously a very major port, but the peripheral things hadn't developed at all. So I analysed that. I thought, well, it's going to be a challenge, and I'm going to be the best thing to slice bread to shipbroking when I get out there because of all my knowledge I've got, etc., etc. But the one thing I miscalculated on is the fact that the way of doing business is totally different. I was used to dealing with Greeks, and the Greek way is, if it makes sense, you know, they use their nose as a calculator. Let's do it, you know. Here, it's very much based on trust, as you know. I mean, I came bowling in here, and and it took me a while. It was quite frustrating, actually, to get into people and for people to trust you, and that took a lot of time.
It's an Asian culture.
Absolutely, which I of course didn't realise, you know, and definitely. So I was quite frustrated. Oh my God, what am I doing here? But eventually I got there, and business started to flow. But Singapore is still a very small market, and indeed the established owners like the PILs, PCL, NOL, they'd all got their links overseas, established links, and so why would they deal with me when they have to probably sort of spend or pay a little bit more commission dealing with Chris Jones in Singapore, who's probably dealing with somebody in London or whatever, you know. So, anyways, in 1986, I started my own business, and because things at Wallen were getting
concurrently while you were with SSY in Singapore?
No, I'll come on to SSY actually. So I moved with Wallen to Singapore in 1982. 86 I started my own business, and fortunately I got into the Australian market, and at that time Australia was going through a very sort of political regime whereby the unions, the shipping unions in particular, were very strong, and the running costs of Australian ships were extremely high. I mean, just nonsensical, twice the amount of what a normal owner would be paying. So as a result, a lot of the Australian owners started to sell their ships. I had been introduced to a company called Howard Smith in Australia, and went down to meet them actually. And the Australians, as you know, are very sort of friendly people, and I did some business with them, and my name spread around. Jones is a good bloke, yeah. You know, he can sell ships for us, no worries at all. So it was like that, and I actually sold most of Howard Smith's vessels, and then I was recommended to another company called Australian Tank Ships, and then A&L were doing a sort of a sellout at that time, so I did all the valuation of their fleet, and also sold some ships to them. So it became a wonderful business for me, and I was by myself actually. So you know, it was sort of good times, but shipbroking was changing at the time as well. It was becoming more information based, and SSY were probably one of the first companies that started
to ride that wave.
Exactly right, and a lot of information coming out. And in 1991, they approached me and said, "Are you interested in setting up SSY's office
in Singapore?"
In Singapore, and working for yourself without the information was somewhat difficult. So I decided I would do it. So we established SSY in 1991.
So you were the very first to set up the office in SSY?
Yes, myself and the guy that came down from SSY's office in Hong Kong, another Chris actually, Chris Twist. He was on tankers.
Another Chris?
Yeah,
Two Chris.
And I was on the sale and purchase side. And we had a little office in Boat Quay actually. I'll tell you a little funny story about that later on. And we built up the office, and then we also put together a joint venture on gas and chemicals with Braemar in those days, who were also one of the major offices, and a company in America called Quincannon, so it was called SBQ. So we had SBQ in the downstairs part of the shop house, us in the upstairs part of the shop house, and eventually we were getting too big, so we moved to Singapore Land Tower actually. And the funny part about it is that when we moved, I used to go back to our old office to pick up the mail, and it turned into a massage parlour. So I used to go back and pick up, and they goes, hey, come. So no, thank you very much. But it was a lot of fun. So I built up SSY to about 35 people. I became a partner of SSY. And then in 2005, we had some differences of opinion.
If my math is correct, that's about 14 years in SSY?
Yes, correct, yeah. And so I left SSY and sold off my partnership shares, etc. I was approached by many and various people actually, including a company called Island Shipbrokers. Island were a private company actually, run by a guy who I knew quite well. So I took 6 people from SSY. I had to serve 6 months gardening. I took 6 people from SSY and we joined Island Shipbrokers. And that probably was the best time of my life in terms of broking actually. Well, the market was just turning very well, and so we sold a lot of ships actually. It's very
Singapore market?
Yeah, in the Singapore market. But also we did some new buildings in China as well. And it was really boomtown Charlie, as you say in Singapore, right?
Whatever happened to the Australian market? I thought you were...
Well, the Australian market, I more or less destroyed the Australian fleet actually by selling out the fleet, because you will rarely find now Australian flag vessels actually. You know, it's just far too expensive to operate Australian flag ships actually. But Australia, I'm still friendly. We've done some small deals there in the past, but
it's not as much as
they don't have an Australian flag fleet anymore, not at all actually. Or there has been some talk recently that they should have some more ships for strategic cargoes, but I don't think that'll come to pass actually. It's impossible. So Island Shipbrokers was good fun. We did some very good business. Then the market began to slow down again. We were approached by a company called ICAP in London, who are PLC, and they wanted to buy us because they were doing paper trades, derivatives, and they wanted the physical side, and they wanted the physical side to complement their paper business. So eventually, I mean, I wasn't a shareholder, but the guy who was a major shareholder said, "Shall we do it?" And I said, "Up to you, man." So we did it, and the regimentation of PLC is quite tough actually. You know, I mean, every penny is catered for. You know, even when you do a photocopy, you have to put your thing in it, so it tells you how much one photocopy is, etc., etc. It was becoming very tiresome. And then we did a lot of business based on a company called Titan Ocean in Tanjong Pelapas. We were storing oil there, and there were purchase options on these big tankers, etc. Then the oil market collapsed. All that business went astray, and suddenly ICAP, the forward book that we had, it disappeared. So they were going, what's going on here? So in 2014, I decided it was time to move on. I was offered a job at the Baltic Exchange, and that's where I set up actually. I became the head of Asia for the Baltic Exchange. I mean, it's not as interesting as shipbroking, obviously, but I mean, the genesis of the Baltic Exchange is as we produce freight rates on a daily basis. So we have a panel of brokers who will assess the market and basically give the market, or members of the Baltic Exchange, the prevailing rates for all the popular routes, whether it be for dry cargo or tankers, and we also do a freight index or price index for ships as well on the sale and purchase side, and also for demolition as well. So it's a ready reference for an owner. He can look at that and he can say, well, that's where the market is. You know, I don't have to sort of negotiate too hard. I should be paying more or less that.
The head of the Asian market means you cover.
So I covered from I went as far as India actually to Australia.
Okay.
But that was good times. But then in 2019, it was probably time to sort of. I was thinking about retirement actually.
And you are here still.
Well, after I'd retired from the Baltic Exchange, my wife and I, we decided we would travel and enjoy retirement, which we duly did. We travelled UK, Australia, and around the Far East, etc. And then suddenly it was just the two of us. And as the old adage goes, familiarity breeds contempt, and we decided that we certainly weren't ready for each other 24/7. Fortunately, I run a shipping lunch here in Singapore on a monthly basis, and a couple of the guys from HFW noted that I was bored and said, well, why don't you come and do some work for us? So I joined HFW as a consultant. Ostensibly, my role is to sort of to assist with opinions on values of ships, freight rates, and the sort of general sort of shipping queries that as lawyers are not able to answer readily. I also have a good contact base here, and I can sort of assist in those respects as well. But also I've been foraging to getting involved in advising on ship sales. I'm currently working on something along those lines. And also I'm working with a shipyard in China about a marketing strategy in terms of how they should be selling their ships, and maybe putting together some sort of leasing deal in order to attract buyers to come and build their shipyard. Unfortunately, that's been somewhat put on hold with COVID, because they're saying, please come and visit us. And of course, I can't do that.
All this under HFW?
This is all under HFW, yeah.
So it's because I think from our understanding is that it's a law firm.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned that these activities are peripheral, auxiliary.
They are
activities.
slightly peripheral to their mainstream stuff, indeed. But I mean, we can always incorporate it under HFW's activities. So they've given me a fairly sort of broad base to work upon, which is very good indeed. And thoroughly enjoyable. And of course, the most important thing, it gets me out of the house.
So it's back to that one reason.
And also keeps me alert, because I really feel that if I let go, I would probably atrophy, maybe, you know. I mean, there's only so much golf you can play, you know, and things like that. And I really need to have some sort of stimulation. And once you get the shipping bug, believe me, it's very, very difficult to let go.
Right, really especially with 45 years under your belt.
It's a long time.
It's part of your life.
And it's a good social circle. I know a lot of people here in Singapore, you know, both business-wise and friendship-wise. It's like a club, actually, and I can't let go. Obviously, one day I'm going to have to let go, but there you go. But we should probably talk a little bit about shipbroking, actually, and what the characteristics required to be a shipbroker. It's something which obviously I look back on and think to myself, well, my God, did I possess those qualities? Because after I came from a fairly ordinary background, I went up to London, and I think the most important thing for me was personality and the ability to get on with people. You know, as a shipbroker, you've got to work hard, and I think going back to what I said earlier about the character training, you know, starting at the very bottom and seeing the goals that you can aim for going up, because all those goals can be yours if you work hard enough. You have to be patient, as I learned when I came to Singapore, because the differential between the Greek attitude and the Asian attitude was poles apart. One thing I always told my youngsters is never admit that you don't know, because then you lose people's confidence completely. Always say, yeah, that's a good point, I'll come back to you on it, or something like that. And as I said earlier, never be cowed by anybody, you know, even if somebody might be sort of a very important person sitting in front of you, you know, there's a great lever that we discussed earlier on, and I think confidence is a wonderful thing. As a shipbroker, you also have to be ready to roll your sleeves up. I mean, there can be a lot of entertaining involved. I mean, really, you know, I mean, one of the things that you've got to have, I mean, the challenges are from sort of a young person's point of view, is that if you are courting or married, etc., it's a very can be a very time-consuming job, and it can cause challenges in your private life, believe me, because sometimes you're going to be on the phone late at night, early in the morning, whatever, because it is an international business after all.
Shipping never stops.
Never stops, and you you're going to have to do entertaining.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you're busy, you've told your partner that we're going on holiday next week, you might have to put that on hold. So there can be challenges. So I would stress that you have to have a very understanding partner, believe me.
I think work-life balance, work-life harmony was one of the questions that was brought up, and I think we will cover it, at the later part of this podcast.
Yeah, sure.
And I think one thing that we want to ask is, I think shipbroking is a very social job. Like meeting people is a core aspect. So could it be a tough aspect, of your job, like because it's very dynamic. You don't know who you're gonna meet. Yeah, like
No, you do, absolutely right.
Yeah.
But I've noticed, and may I comment, that when I first came to Singapore and I wanted to hire youngsters here, there was always do I have to do this? Do I have to go out at night? What are the hours I have to work, etc. There has been a huge sea change now, I think. In my shipbroking days, we had trainees in or interns in, and then during my Baltic Exchange days, and the youngsters I had in were just very dynamic people, and I think also the exchange program you have, which you're not unfortunately going to enjoy, which is sad, but and that's a very, very good thing as well. It teaches you independence as well, and you see a different part of the world, etc., etc. Makes you more rounded people, and I think the talent pool here now is fantastic. It really is. I mean, I think the need for foreign talent is still there, but I think you can still find it in the talent pool here in Singapore and shipping. Loads of smart young kids actually, and indeed, if you look at the broking scene as a whole here, there are some very, very good local broking companies. Really. People like Eastport, Raffles, etc. I mean, these companies are just fantastic. They really are. And largely all local talent, actually. Yeah, and quite amazing. Some of them. I mean, one of the guys who's one of the most successful brokers at Eastport. One of the bosses was in a taxi one day, and he said to this guy, and he thought he liked it. He said, come and join. And he was a taxi driver, believe it or not, and he's become one of the sharpest and best brokers on tankers. Yeah, seriously. So, it's not about education, I don't think. And I saw this myself when I was in London. I came through the system as a trainee, but we took some of the brokers who were very successful out of the telex room in those days. A telex machine, in case you're not aware, is well before email, okay? And he used to run a tape, used to type a message and run a tape through it and things like that, and send messages that way. It was a very slow way of doing business, but that was the way it was done. And these guys would see the terms and conditions and everything. And then some of them would come out and have been very, very successful brokers. In fact, I'm in contact with still a friend of mine who was doing scrap of shipping, demolition of ships, still doing to this day, and still one of the top names in scrapping in the business. But he's probably got about 5 O levels only, So sometimes, it doesn't matter how many letters you've got after your name. It doesn't guarantee you're going to be a successful shipbroker. As I say, the characteristics really personality, the ability to get on with people, and the ability to ride the wave, and confidence for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
But also, key element, an understanding partner. Believe me, that counts for a lot. My first wife wasn't terribly understanding. I think that's one of the reasons why we drifted apart.
I see. Yeah, I think there's this understanding that maritime industry is a very you need maritime knowledge to come into the industry. But I think
But I think also, if you're a questioning individual, then you will listen, watch, learn, and you'll pick it up. You'll pick up the jargon, you'll pick up the modus operandi of negotiation, etc.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot involved in that. On the dry cargo side, the charter part is a very intense document, to learn all the nuances of that. And similarly on the sale and purchase side as well. So you have to have a little bit of legal knowledge as well, I think. But be patient, drink it up, question, and you'll get there, believe me.
Yeah, because a lot of people actually think and see it as a barrier that they have to have that extensive maritime knowledge or a degree to get into this sector.
Just really curious. Have you done when you get people into your shipbrokering companies, like when you hire them? Just want to get a feel. What are their
What do they look out for?
what did they study? What are their majors? Yeah, just curious about this.
When we were hiring brokers at SSY, one of the guys, he didn't have a degree. He worked for Rank Xerox actually.
Rank Xerox.
Rank Xerox as a trainee, as a salesman, yeah. And he came in, and we actually saw about 4 or 5 guys, and he was a fairly jovial sort of guy, and didn't know anything about shipping at all actually, but we thought, well, this guy's probably trainable actually. So we offered him a job as a trainee, and he became a very successful broker. He now works for this company called Eastport actually, which is
the one you mentioned.
Yeah, and doing very, very well indeed. I never really sort of asked for degrees, to be perfectly frank, because probably from my own standpoint as well, I didn't have a degree. So I don't think it benchmarks you necessarily as being a sort of a top echelon person, to be frank. I mean, okay, these days I know it's probably necessary to have something like that, but it shouldn't really be an entry point actually. It should be, but having said that, I have to say that the course that they offer you and the well-rounded sort of advice they give you, it does turn out very, very good and capable people indeed.
So for you really look at the character of the person. Of course, education is important, but that is secondary. That can be trained.
Or a bonus.
Yeah. I think I mean, if you look at the money market, they used to have what they call the barrow boy mentality. In other words, I mean, these guys that would be able to sell sand to the Arabs, they just have this way of doing business. And so the money brokers, I mean, they just did make fortunes because they had the ability to talk and convince, etc., etc. And that's a sort of a similar attitude that we used to see in shipbroking in London in those days, actually. But of course, the benchmark is now you have to have a degree probably to get into it. Although there still are those that I think can slip in actually with experience, etc.
I see.
So Chris, actually, we would like to also ask you, what do you see potentially how COVID would proceed on with in the next few months, and also maybe a little bit more about how digitization has affected shipbroking.
Well, I think one of the biggest complications of COVID is the poor seafarer and how he's stuck on his vessel. Obviously, he's not allowed access to ports. Crew changes are very difficult to implement. In fact, thankfully, Singapore is one of the sort of the leaders now in effecting crew changes. But of course, not everybody changes crew in Singapore.
Yeah.
So as a result, you're getting a lot of crew stuck on board well in excess of their contracts. A normal contract will be 6 or 9 months, and they're stuck on board for 15 months or even longer. And of course, that's causing, to a certain extent, mental health problems, because whilst some ship owners do allow access to Wi-Fi on board the vessels, many don't. And so obviously you can imagine the poor seafarer there who may come from India or Indonesia or the Philippines, where there are COVID hotspots, is obviously worried about his family, and in turn, of course, the family are worried about him as well. And the lack of contact is a very, very difficult thing to take on board. And conversely, of course,
what is being done now in Singapore to try and mitigate?
Well, Singapore have got it off to a fine art now, actually, whereby they've even got barges where they can put the disembarking crew on board the barges, test them, and then put them through to connecting flights pretty much as quickly as they possibly can. Obviously, it has to be concurrent with flights back to the Philippines or India or Indonesia or whatever. But Singapore, I think, is probably tops in doing the crew changes actually, and hats off to the MPA for working out a working solution, because it is a big problem. As I think I said earlier on, about 1 million seafarers at sea, and there's about 300,000 plus who are well in excess of their contracts. And after all, when we analyse the fact that 90% at least of our goods are carried by sea, these guys are a very integral part of our lives. So they're not probably getting the recognition that they should actually, which is a great shame. Also, I think COVID has probably affected market rates. Surprisingly, actually, that the container market was very much in the doldrums, but the container rates have picked up actually. Something to do apparently with a lack of empties available in the most popular sort of import and export areas. So the container rates at the moment are fairly good, but obviously I think the tanker market is under stress. The wheels of industry aren't turning as fast as they do under non-COVID times, and you're seeing freight rates for tankers, in fact the bigger tankers now, at less than break-even rates actually. So that's a bit of a tough situation. The positives of COVID actually, however, from our point of view, are probably the fact that working from home, people are having possibly a better quality of life to a certain extent, particularly for people who've got young children, etc. They're seeing more of their kids, etc., etc. The other things, of course, which I think is going to have an impact on going forward, is the fact that offices, do we need big spaces for offices anymore? Can we combine working from home and working in the office so we don't have to have massive office spaces anymore? This is one of the things that we've got to think about. Also travel, with Zoom and the other systems that have developed. You can't knock out travel completely, but business travel, I think, will be severely reduced, because you can call up somebody in Tokyo and say, hey, what about this, what about that? Of course,
it's very natural now to do it over.
Absolutely right. It's become sort of the norm, and probably much more efficient. Having said that, a few people have commented to me that, if it's a serious decision, they'd like to see the person in face to sort of to catch their body language properly, rather than just seeing a face.
I think to a certain extent, you cannot replace that face-to-face.
I agree. I think that's very important. But in the meantime, Zoom has served very well indeed. A thing for us actually, which has been a positive, one of our major activities here is the ship closing business. So when a ship is sold, you have the documentary aspect, and you have the payment process as well. And this is something that HFW do very efficiently, and we do something like 300 ship closings a year actually. But presence was required for people to sign off and etc. etc. But what we've done is, because of COVID, is we've got a situation whereby we can do it online. We obviously have to get the power of attorneys from the buyers and the sellers to give us permission to sign off on these things. But as a result, it's become a very efficient process without the buyers and the sellers or their representatives having to travel here. So they're saving. And believe me, a lot of the people travel from Europe, they travel from Greece, etc. So they're saving a lot of money in air travel and hotels and their entertainment, etc., etc. So that's been, I guess, a positive in a way.
Do you see this continuing into the future? Because I think right now vaccines are maybe made available in the US, and it's definitely going to be distributed. So we can see that COVID is coming to an end. Do you actually see this working style, penetrating into the future?
I think we are all dying to travel, and I think giving a lecture or a presentation online is okay, but it's a bit passé in a way. Actually, there's nothing better than standing up in front of an audience, I think, and getting sensible questions answered, etc. And I think also, it's still important to do some flag flying as well, which of course we were intending to do pre-COVID, actually, to spread the word a little bit about our capabilities, what we can do, etc., and particularly in areas like Vietnam, in India, in Indonesia, etc., which are all sort of growing shipping centres. But let's see. I mean, I think that the vaccines are going to come on stream, and please God, March, April time, we'll be able to walk down the aisle, which means get on the plane, of course, and walk down the aisle of the plane. I sincerely hope so. Turning to digitalisation for a moment, I think that's made a very big impact on shipbroking. The role of a shipbroker is between the buyer and the seller, the middleman, as it were. The problem these days is, of course, there's so much information out there that the question is often asked, why do I need a broker? You know, I can go directly, and indeed a lot of owners do that, whether it be on the buying and selling of ships, or whether it be on the chartering of ships as well. And this is one of the problems that we had when we were at the Baltic Exchange, actually, because a lot of owners and a lot of brokers were members of the Baltic Exchange, and the brokers are preparing the daily freight rates, as it were, as a reference to owners. And the owners are looking at it and saying, okay, thank you very much, brokers, you've done all the hard yards, and I'll go and talk to the principal and fix. So, you know, that was kind of counterproductive, and it's still a bit of a problem at the Baltic Exchange, that there has to be some sort of
change.
Well, not change, but I mean, recognition of the job that the brokers are doing, you know, and you can't sort of be a member of the Baltic Exchange living off the broker's knowledge, fixing on their basis, and cutting them out of a deal. So that's still being much talked about. But it certainly is impinging on the role of a broker, that's for sure. And I wouldn't say that the broking will disappear, but certainly it's changing in structure. I think as a result, you've got to be very much in your principal's face. You've got to hang on to their shirt tails like mad. I think some of the smaller brokers, as a result, are disappearing. You know, one-man, two-man shops, etc. It's very difficult for them to sort of survive. And you're seeing, as a result, a sort of a gradual sort of shift to the bigger broking companies like the Clarksons, the Braemars, the HFWs, the SSYs, and people like this, you know, who tend to be sort of the Arrow, they're kind of market leaders, actually. I mean, there is still a role for the smaller broker, you know, if he's got a niche number of owners who rely on him. And, you know, many owners, they don't want to look for information, they want their broker, just like a stockbroker, to come and say, look, this is a good deal, this I've got a connection here, etc., and they will still support him. But I may just wonder how much longer that will go on for. Actually, it's pretty tough, actually.
But I think on the bright side, we have discussed that face-to-face interaction can actually never be replaced.
No, you're absolutely right. And I remember a long time ago there was a broking platform. I think it's called Level Seas that came out. This is like sort of in I think just in the millennium, actually. And it was supposed to be, you know, going to knock brokers out of business, etc., etc.
Hasn't.
And you're supposed to put your cargoes and your ships for sale on this platform, and people would pay and subscribe to sort of get the information, etc., etc. And it never took off. It was a major flop, and big names invested in it, actually. But I mean, one young broker in our on our tanker department summed it up very well. He said, it's all very well, he said, having a platform to do business. He said, but who's going to take you out for a drink afterwards? Not the platform. And that kind of sort of, you know, you can't take the personal element out of it. You know, I mean, I might have some private business that others don't have because I've got a relationship with a particular oil company or a particular owner or whatever. And that element is always going to exist there. So, but the role of the broker is certainly under stress. I know, because I have two sons who are brokers in London, and believe me, it's not as easy as it used to be. You know, in my day, it was probably a lot sort of simpler to get between the buyer and the seller, or the owner and the charterer.
Could I say that because of all the platforms, you have so much information, of course, being faced, like for the principal. So a broker will come in and actually filter out those information for you and say, hey, actually this can be more viable for you, instead of looking at the whole picture. And I think that adds value to the role.
Yes, I mean, a lot of owners don't want to read reams and reams of information. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm buying stocks and shares, I don't necessarily want to sort of read the Financial Times from back to front.
Right.
If I've got a stockbroker, I want him to tell me what's good, what's bad, etc. So that situation will still continue, I'm sure. But as I say, there is a lot of information out there, and some of them, some owners and some charters, etc., will prefer to do the business directly. And also when it's a long-term charter, where there's a lot of commission that can be earned, perhaps they'll like to cut out the broker.
That's true. That is true.
On the high capital deals, yeah.
We have come to the end of part 1 for this podcast. If you have enjoyed our content so far, please like, share and subscribe to our channel. And do turn on that notification so that you know when part 2 comes out and our subsequent videos. We actually have a question from one of our viewers. It's about the commission rate of a shipbroker. You get a comment on that?
Well, obviously this person, I think, is probably interested in wondering how much money he's going to make if he becomes a shipbroker. I think that's probably the relevance of the question. You're talking not personally, I hope you're talking about...
No, in general.
Because you can say I'm a poor man.